At that time we were getting daily briefings from all of the agencies, so it came through the agency briefing. I can't remember exactly who the representative from police was in the room at that particular meeting, but that information came directly from the police. And look, I regret that the police person who was giving that information was obviously out of date with what had happened on the ground there. Look, as I said, I would have preferred to have more up-to-date information, but I'm absolutely confident in the advice that police are giving us now.
Prime Minister, there's been more flooding in Wairoa and Karaka recently and concern of a COVID-19 outbreak as well. Have you got any update on health and the general response there?
The feedback that we've had so far is that we're not dealing with a significant increase in COVID-19 cases on the East Coast, but of course that is something that we will keep an eye on. We are concerned about some of the potential health issues associated with the clean-up. Some pretty good guidance has been issued around what people should do to keep themselves safe when they're cleaning up, so use of PPE and so on, because they are, if they're handling silt and they're handling, things that have washed up, that can be hazardous. So we just ask people to make sure that they're following that guidance around protecting their health in those circumstances. In terms of the flooding or the additional evacuations overnight, there were, I think, around 15 families that ended up in an emergency evacuation space overnight. There could be more people, though, that just evacuated but stayed with friends and relatives, and we don't necessarily have a record of those.
When do you think the infrastructure there will be at a level where we don't continue to see roads collapsing and this flooding happening on, what is an exceptional rainfall?
Yeah. One of the challenges here is that it takes a wee while for things to dry out again, so the crews are working as hard as they can to try and clean up the mess and to try and repair the roads. But in the case of slips, for example, it can take some time before the earth dries out enough to stop moving. So that is one of the challenges that the repair crews are already having to grapple with on a day-to-day basis. Yes. So we just have to work through a process to make sure that the decisions that we take around managed retreat, around whether any properties should be bought out and those sorts of things, we need to make sure that we're doing that based on a really clear evidence base and that we've got a clear and transparent set of criteria for the decisions that we're making. After the Canterbury earthquakes, it took several months to work through that process, and we have to recognise that to some extent there is a different degree of complexity associated with this one, because in the case of the earthquakes, some of that red zone land, it was going to be quite some time before any remediation or anything could be done there. In the case of flooding, there are often other things that can be done. Extra flood protection can be put in place and so on. We've got our scientists in there at the moment looking at the silt, for example, to understand what the best ways of dealing with that are. Where there are very high piles of silt, it may be better to leave that in place rather than try and move it. On the other hand, in some areas, the clean-up's well underway. So some of those orchardists who had a moderate level of silt underneath their trees, they're in there cleaning it out now because time is of the essence. So there's no hard and fast rules here, but we've just got to work through a careful process, but we'll do that as quickly as we can.
A new courier poll shows that more voters currently trust Nicola Willis and Chris Luxon as the economic team compared to yourself and Grant Robertson. What's your response to that?
Not really spending a lot of time looking at opinion polls. I know none of you will believe me when I say that. I'm a politician, but I haven't actually spent a lot of time looking at the polls in the last couple of weeks. There's been rather a lot on the go during that time. But on the overall management of the economy, I think our track record's a really strong one. So we've got New Zealand into a position where we've got low levels of debt, so we are in a position to respond to the events that are in front of us. Even if we borrow extra to get ourselves through this period of disaster response and recovery, we're still going to end up with lower levels of debt than Australia, Canada, the UK, the US, and I think that's a good track record. We've got record low unemployment. We've seen solid economic growth despite the experiences of the global pandemic. I think that's a pretty proud track record for us.
New Zealand boss Rob Campbell looks to be unapologetic about his comments around the National Party free borders policy. Do you think it is now time for him to resign?
Like I said this morning, ministers, the relevant ministers to whom he reports, are having conversations with him, and we need to let that process run its course.
Are those conversations about him stepping down?
Look, again, we need to allow that process to run its course. Yeah. Can I just take a moment to acknowledge the Muriwai community? I did go and visit them over the weekend. Clearly they are grieving. They're grieving having lost two really important members of their local community, and they're wrapping support around those families and the volunteer fire brigade, who obviously are feeling this keenly. There are a lot of people out of their homes, and I think anybody across the country can understand how traumatic that can be, to have left your home in a hurry and not be able to return. So the Muriwai community have more uncertainty ahead of them, and I just really want to acknowledge that. We need to work through a careful process with them so that we're treating them fairly and with respect, whilst also trying to get as quick a decision around the future of their community as we possibly can. There will be some who really want to return, there will be some who might not want to return, and there's still a lot of uncertainty around what the safe thing to do for that community is. We've got the geologists in there now. I was shown around the community by geologists who are doing as much work as they can, as quick as they can, to understand exactly what's going on with the land. The land is still moving. Every time there's more rain, more land comes down, and so they've just got to work through that, and they'll give us advice on what the right thing to do for that community is. Sorry, I was... Look, I wouldn't necessarily want to speculate on the individual causes. There is a bit of an international trend around this. We are seeing more polarisation in our politics. To some extent we've been behind the rest of the world in that regard, and New Zealand is kind of catching up with the rest of the world in that area, and that's a bit sad really, because I quite liked the way we did politics previously, where generally speaking we might have argued our case hard, but we generally were not so competitive. I think there's an element of international culture around politics creeping in. My overall message is I respect my opponents even if I don't agree with them. I enjoy a good debate and a good argument. My message to New Zealanders is continue to have friends who disagree with you, because that's the way we avoid a polarised society where we do end up with things like the threats of violence towards politicians increasing. We live in a free democracy where people are free to argue with each other, and that's something that we should celebrate. Well, probably a bit less, because I get a little bit more support with that these days. But look, naturally, Prime Ministers are very reluctant to comment on security matters, and I'm not going to, really change with that pattern.
It's obviously been a really exhausting start to the year, I think, for all MPs, politicians, all the events we've seen. How are you feeling? Is this sort of how you expected the start of your tenure to be?
Yeah, it's certainly been a bumpy start to the year, but I want to acknowledge the people whose lives have been turned upside down. Actually, yep, there are days when occasionally it might feel a little tiring, and then I go and speak to people who have lost their homes and lost everything, and it puts things into perspective. I love my job, I'm enjoying my job, I guess, and I take a lot of strength from the resilience of Kiwis and the way that we are all supporting and rallying around people who are doing it really tough at the moment. All right. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.